first found out that I had TTP in 2012, and my initial signs and symptoms were, it was probably the fact that I was getting infection after infection, and then I had a lot of bruising on my body, but the bruising was pretty normal for me. So it was just a case of sort of, unfortunately, when I had a stroke and when I collapsed at home, that's when I was taken to hospital. The tests that were done were, I had an MRI scan of the brain and I had a blood test, but they weren't looking for TTP. And it was 8 hours after I was in hospital. I'd already had renal failure, and one by one my body was sort of deteriorating. And it was only when a doctor that had come on duty 8 hours after I was in accident and emergency that he recognised the signs of TTP with the heavy bruising on my body, and anywhere I was touched there was excessive bruising, and he ordered the blood test for the platelet count and the full blood count, and he said that I had TTP. In terms of when I was diagnosed and the period in between, I kept getting a lot of viral infections and a lot of infection after infection. So for me personally, it was probably months and months, and it was only at the point that I collapsed and was taken into hospital that it was diagnosed. My treatment of my first episode consisted of plasmapheresis and full bloods. So I got a lot of blood was given. I stayed in the hospital for, it must have been just over 3 weeks. I was in intensive care for the first week and then on a normal ward for 2 weeks. And it was a good experience. You know, generally I was treated very, very well. And it was just a case of just having needles and needles and needles, sort of, that was obviously the difficult part. The follow-up for me, where I was in a TTP specialist centre, so for my follow-up it was very good. I was actually followed up on a weekly basis, and I had the bloods tested every week, and I describe TTP as a rare blood disorder that affects the platelets in the blood, and it's not an illness that anybody can catch. It's just something that happens to people. I think in my case, the most difficult aspect of living with TTP is the fact that I get tired much more easy. And it's just one of those things that I've had to change my lifestyle to adjust. I would suggest that anybody that's just been diagnosed with TTP to not sort of look online and look at these kind of postings on Facebook or on social media that share their traumatic stories, because everybody's story is different and there are treatment options available out there. It's just a case of trying to do the research, perhaps look at the TTP patient network to get solid information where you can actually be educated about TTP rather than listening to the scare stories that are out there. In my case, my life has changed. I was working full-time as a manager, and I had to take a downgrade because I couldn't take the stress, and I also had to work part-time. So that's probably been the biggest effect for me, but it's also about managing change in terms of not doing as much as I used to, and looking after myself better. Okay, my hope for the future is that one day there will be a cure for TTP, and also in the meantime that every patient that has TTP gets treated quickly and efficiently.